Hi everyone, Digital Bro Tano here. Worst teeth in the game. But he got the best teeth though. Don't got time in the day to eat and pray and love and stay ahead of the game. Gotta take care of my brain to stay sane while again and again putting way too much on my plate. So here's the game. A decade disappears like tears in rain. I strain to retain some memories of greats to carry forward and see again. Top 50 TV anime in 2 parts. Music videos, albums, and music artists. YouTube videos, YouTubers, anime studios, films, and video games. At that length, it'll take into January. I got rants on rants overdue and shit to ship out and shows to boost clout and content twice a week and personal upkeep. Buying my own groceries, listening to all my peeps, and keeping my head open so I don't skip good ideas. So here's one. With consideration for the interests of my most hardcore fans, I have to wonder in what way I could deliver to them the maximum quality of content that I could produce in the smallest time. The answer is an in-depth analytical video about a subject I have no way to represent visually, and therefore would make most sense as a written post read on camera in a decently produced vlog format. I'm sure it won't be pulling the views, but I'm halfway through editing the first half of my Top 50 Anime of the Decade 2-parter, and I want something to come out on this channel right now, both to explain the situation and present something substantial in its own right. I hope that's not too apologetic, but let's not age this video any further. Re-listening to the 1987 album Strangeways, Here We Come by the Smiths got me thinking about storytelling in music, as Morrissey is one of the masters. It's not just about the lyricism. Across this album, it feels as though Morrissey listened to the instrumental and imagined what kind of scenario this vibe could represent, which would mean something to him. He would then create a character who could tell a story about feeling those emotions, and elaborate on that character over the course of the track, giving more depth both to the story told in the lyrics and the mood being created in the instrumental. We can see this right away, and at almost its most extreme, in the opening track, a rush and a push and the land is ours. At the start of the track is this bizarre, almost dizzying piano playing, over which Morrissey fades in while crooning, "Oh, I am the ghost of troubled Joe, hung by his pretty white neck some 18 months ago." Right away, the use of the vocal fade over that almost gothic piano intro, combined with the reference to a ghost, seems to contextualize Morrissey's interpretation of this vibe as something supernatural. However, as the song goes on, there are no further references to the character being dead or a ghost, so the possibility that this self-description could be more metaphorical enters your mind on reflection. He continues, "I traveled to a mystical time zone, and I missed my bed, and I soon came home." I won't sing anymore, but I had to for those lyrics. In one sentence, we've created a character who left home and then retreated shortly thereafter, describing the place they moved to as a mystical time zone, as if to suggest that the experience was so alien to the narrator as to feel like it killed him. After this lyric and a drum rise, the song blows up into the danceable jangle rock that the Smiths are known for as we learn more about Troubled Joe. They said there's too much caffeine in your bloodstream and a lack of real spice in your life. This is one of the many times that Morrissey has crafted an utterly relatable and believable character, one perhaps similar to a person he's been or known. Considering this was made in the 80s, it almost feels like a premonition of what the next generation was going to become. The self-defense is pathetic by design, with the narrator pleading, "Leave me alone because I'm alright, Dad, surprised to still be on my own." So perhaps the narrator didn't actually move back into his parents' house, or this was the narrator's sentiment before he finally returned home. Either way, it's clear that he really wanted to become independent from his parents, but did so in a way which didn't work out. But then the comforting groove of the song drops out for some really atmospheric keyboard juts over Morrissey crooning, "Oh, but don't mention love." I'd hate the strain of the pain all over again, being extremely direct here. This character has been deeply hurt by their past relationship and hasn't even approached attempting to find love again, as they strive to make something of themselves in the simple sense of even escaping the house. Our next segment really reinforces the feeling that Morrissey crafted his character around the changes in tone of the very experimental instrumental progression in this song. As everyone launches into a marching rhythm with a bright, confident melody, he practically growls, "A rush and a push, and the land that we stand on is ours. It has been before, so it shall be again. And people who are uglier than you and I, they take what they need and just leave." Later, when this chorus is repeated, the lyrics become, "It has been before, so why can't it be now? And people who are weaker than you and I, they take what they want from life." Now, this could be interpreted any number of metaphorical ways, but it really seems like the narrator is throwing himself into some kind of political cause. This land was ours once, it can be ours again. Is he looking to overthrow the government? What kind of enterprise does he want to establish where the ugly people just leave and the weak take what they want from life? What does any of that even really mean? I suspect it's vague on purpose to give a general sense of this person harboring what sounds like a potentially fascist or at very least self-centered regime. Is this political identity what's helping this character through this period in their life where love isn't even a question? Or is this all just a metaphor for regaining self-worth? But then why the thing about the ugly people? Well, in any case, it doesn't matter because the narrator's dick resolves the issue. Before the third chorus, instead of complaining about the strain of the pain after crying, "Oh, but don't mention love," this time he follows that up with a desperate sounding, "No, no, don't mention love." And then the third chorus is as follows. "A rush and a push, and the land that we stand on is ours. Your youth may be gone, but you're still a young man. So phone me, phone me." He repeats the "phone me" line again, but in a barking way, clearly meant to be confusable with "fuck me, phone me, phone me." So it would seem that a woman who was interested in him on seemingly a first-glance basis easily eroded his foothold of giving a shit about anything else, because the rest of the song is just a long, slow, atmospheric fade over the character saying, "I think I'm in love," over and over again, as if this was all he ever thought about from that point on, followed by a series of heavily affected moans which almost seem to suggest that the ghost of Troubled Joe has finally moved on to the afterlife and faded from reality. All of the songs on this album are this unique and complex and full of landmine lyrics that you'll never ever stop thinking about. One of the choruses is "Girlfriend in a coma, I know it's serious," sung over the jauntiest tune imaginable. And yes, even that song gets more emotionally complex the more we learn about the characters' relationship through the particular choices of words that Morrissey uses to hint at it. It's important to note that it's not just a matter of Morrissey creating strange and interesting narratives in his songs. All of the stories are also very distinctly Morrissey. He expresses political views often and inner thoughts about people and the industry and art, citing a broad swath of historical figures from Oscar Wilde to Cleopatra. Paint a Vulgar Picture does just that about the way that the record companies handle dead stars, but then threads in a story about his own history of having been in love with the very dead star and never getting a chance with them despite the fact that they were close in proximity at various times, ending proudly in his proclamation that the industry could never taint this person in his eyes. If you pay attention, the way the song is structured is that the riff always starts in an upbeat way, with Morrissey describing the delight which the record companies feel about marketing their dead star, while the second half of the riff dips into a somber tone, and Morrissey spits something sarcastic and cutting about the practices. If the song Big Mouth Strikes Again was any indicator in its commentary on the situation, Morrissey was prone to stir controversy by being upfront with his opinions, titling albums things like "The Queen is Dead" and "Meat is Murder." As I thought about the stories told in Morrissey's lyrics, I remembered a YouTube video I watched about a month before Kendrick Lamar's Damn dropped in 2017. The video posited that Kendrick was a perpetual storyteller, always playing characters in his songs and never himself. I thought it was a stretch, and when Damn came out and was Kendrick's first album to practically be about himself in its entirety, the video felt instantly dated. However, there's no doubt that the kind of character-driven storytelling on Kendrick's albums is quite different from the Smiths. For one thing, the Smiths made songs and Kendrick makes albums. While there's plenty of variety in his songs, every album is clearly devised as a singular piece with a particular message, even in the case of Damn or Section 80, which are more loosely connected. There's a reason his album cover for Good Kid, Mad City calls it a film by Kendrick Lamar. It's meant to be a story, not unlike a prog album with a narrative behind it. Of course, while it does have a few total minutes of skits over the course of it to help tell a more concrete story than the one told from the many different vantage points of the songs, and focusing on more particular details in the lyrics, it is nonetheless pretty fair to consider this album an opera, not just because it's entirely comprised of music, it's also the structure of the storytelling. A lot of the songs don't literally progress the narrative, but rather focus on exploring a single idea emotionally in the lyrics, with references to an ongoing narrative which can be visualized in the parts where it comes to the forefront. Not only that, but very little of the story is even told through dialogue or diegetic scenes. In fact, most of the stage is set in the opening track, Shireen, which is essentially Kendrick narrating a montage of his relationship with this girl leading up to the moment that she connects to the story, though it will be told anachronically from there. Kendrick's role as a narrator is imperative because, contrary to what that video had claimed, Kendrick always pours an enormous amount of himself into the stories. After all, most of the events of this album's story are a dramatized version of things which really happened to him in real life or to the people around him. There's a whole track on this album where he just answers dramatized criticisms from people whose life experiences he had dramatized on previous albums. There is no way to interpret that section other than as Kendrick himself interpreting these letters, even if he's delivering them as though he was the person who wrote them. Moreover, there are sections on each album, usually during the longer, more trance-inducing tracks, in which Kendrick gives pretty straightforward updates about his current state of mind and how it relates to the things that he's reminiscing on in the album. You can hear that in songs like Real and Sing About Me on Good Kid, Mad City, King Kunta, You, The Blacker the Berry, and Mortal Man from To Pimp a Butterfly, and most directly in Fear from Damn. There's no real way to interpret these tracks other than personal confessionals from Kendrick Lamar, often in reflection of the album's story. Jesus Christ Superstar is a rock opera which debuted in 1970 and was adapted to film in 1973, which is written as a fairly straightforward dramatic retelling of the story of Christ, with a dramatic increase in focus on Judas and humanizing his betrayal of Jesus. Only the production deliberately calls attention to itself by featuring a bunch of modern hippies portraying the characters and drawing attention to the fact that, particularly in the film, this is basically just a hippie party in the desert recreating the story of Jesus. It's only towards the end of the film that the design of it becomes woven into its lyrical content. After having hung himself and before the death of Jesus, the spirit of Judas visits him, seemingly descended from heaven, so Dante BTFO. Judas has apparently returned from the present, now aware of the influence which Jesus has had on culture from that point forward, and simply asks Jesus if he had any idea what he had accomplished, and if he really planned on dying to make this happen. Not really expecting an answer. But telling stories imbued with the narration and personality of the narrator is more or less the norm for rap music. Kendrick is obviously notable for how distant he makes himself in a lot of his songs, but there are plenty of rappers who more directly tell stories tied up in their own personalities and character. Denzel Curry would be a great example of someone who sometimes literally tells third-person stories about characters, like in tracks such as Dark and Violent, or even embodies characters in songs like Sick and Tired, where he plays multiple characters from first-person perspectives. But more often, he portrays a character somewhere between himself and a manufactured character to deliver the specific vibe of a particular song concept, such as on Ice Age. Only on a few tracks, though, will Denzel or most rappers completely disappear into their narrative. If you want that, you really have to come to clipping, as for my money, the out-and-out best storytellers in hip-hop. Grammy and Tony Award-winning performer of Thomas Jefferson in Hamilton, Daveed Diggs, is not interesting because of his wealth of technical ability and proliferation of cold-ass lines. It's because he can turn an abstract beat into a vivid and often intense narrative. On Clipping's first album, they were doing hip-hop reconstructions. Daveed wrote dark tales of particular hip-hop styles built from a pastiche of tropes, such as the constant references to a club atmosphere on the blast of noise and energy that is Get It, where he and Kill Rogers go beyond a level of sleaze which a club song would ever get away with, under blasting walls of noise that have made my friends turn off my stereo. It's obvious how all of the parts of the song are meant to reference a classic club track, but the version Clipping creates is so dirty and gross that it almost puts a pathetic sheen on the whole scene. And that's a major part of Daveed's aesthetic. The characters in his stories are often simple, bad-off, and dangerous people. His stories are often horrific, intense violence, and always tinged with the hollow meaninglessness of nihilism. He, the narrator, feels nothing for these characters. He wants to present their reality starkly, and there's always a feeling like his characters are at the bottom, and he's looking down at them, telling them that they just need to bust their ass to get like him. On the second album, he raps over the sound of an alarm clock. The first lyrics are "Game don't wait. Hold on, wait. Eyes on the grind, motherfucker, can't be late." I had this as my actual alarm for a while, and it certainly makes you feel like you need to jump into action right as soon as your feet hit the floor. If ever Daveed perfected his storytelling style, though, I think it was on the latest album, There Existed an Addiction to Blood. His characters and their situations are less often aesthetically driven, and more built around the music to create the most perfect tonal combinations. Of course, every album's story track is an absolute masterpiece of matching sound with story and creating complex, interesting characters in the moment when their life takes a sharp turn for the worst. All of those are intense and excellent, but plenty of tracks on the new album are just as good. One of my favorites, The Show, is from the perspective of a demented director, mildly amused as he carves people up for a show for other people while insisting that they stop freaking out about it and enjoy the show and help him out on deciding what to do with the body. This character essentially is a dark take on Daveed himself. Amazingly, that pinnacle of interwoven lyrical and musical storytelling in hip-hop released just a week after a similar accomplishment in folk and rock music with Richard Dawson's new album 2020. Whereas Clipping creates a wholly unique sound palette in crafting their texture-focused instrumentals, Dawson utilizes a larger number of traditional instruments and specific tuning and mixing to create more melodically driven and emotional atmospheres. My absolute favorite track of his is Jogging, a 7-minute opus about a middle-aged single man with crippling anxiety who's taken up jogging at the suggestion of his doctor alongside medication to help combat his dramatically negative self-image, and he is drained by the negative progress in his career and unfriendliness of the place where he lives. The character portrayed in this song is densely detailed and realistic to a point where you really have to remind yourself that this is literally not from Dawson's perspective. Nothing on the album is, and it's all in this vein. The way that the song evolves across its soaring emotional choral climaxes, humming synth solo, and enormous chugging guitar sections as the narrator tries to block out his surroundings and focus completely on the jogging, perfectly matches the underlying pain and tragedy of the lyrics, even as the actual word choices are fairly direct and descriptive, as if the narrator himself isn't necessarily meant to be so capable of artfully representing his emotions as Dawson is capable of doing with the instruments and his manner of singing. And of course, the sneaky cleverness that he, while fitting it into the story, nonetheless obviously winks at the audience, like when the narrator fears that he heard a street performer sneak a nasty word into Wonderwall as he passed by. The song's epic climax is similar and so unguarded and sincere in presentation that it nearly brings me to tears, when the narrator proudly declares, after having described the horrifying state of affairs where his Kurdish neighbors on the ground floor have had a brick put through their window, that he is going to try and gather sponsors to promote him running the London Marathon because they're trying to raise money for the British Red Cross. When you hear it in context, it's such a powerful statement of purpose as to stir. Of course, it is no surprise that folk music can be used to tell stories, even if Dawson incorporated more modern instrumentation here than usual for the genre, and tells stories specifically of the here and now in a fairly direct fashion. Contrast that with someone like Joanna Newsom, who even more stridently matches her storytelling to her instrumentation bar by bar, but tells more opaque and fantastical stories without clear definition. Her husband, Andy Samberg, does the polar opposite in his own musical storytelling with The Lonely Island. These tracks are as blunt and direct as possible in the name of broad humor, but similarly to clipping, they twist traditional rap genres to make comedic mashups of very real-sounding instrumentals with fake-sounding lyrics. Many of them are just as effective as their serious counterparts at sharing unforgettable stories in catchy musical form. Their collaborator T-Pain performed a more sincere brand of comedy rap, constructing lyrics which almost sound real in the context of their instrumentals, but are just so goofy and absurd with their storytelling that they cross the line from relatable into clearly comedic. But we really don't need rappers or singer-songwriters to tell a compelling story with music. In many of these cases, the instrumentation already tells a powerful emotional story even before the addition of vocals, and in some cases it could be argued that the definition lent to the story by the lyrics actually limits the potential of how the song could be interpreted. Anamanaguchi shows us multiple styles of compositional storytelling across their last two albums, often using song titles as a hint to their intentions with a song. For instance, John Hughes from Endless Fantasy has a fairly normal song structure and vibe that, while distinct, would be hard to pinpoint exactly. A title like John Hughes, however, referencing the known style of a very particular film director, functions as a sort of hint to certain audience members for them to consider how this music might reflect on this theme. In cases like Everything Explodes, the correlation is very direct, though in cases like SPF 420, it might be a little more open to interpretation. On the band's new album, USA, their song structures are often far more experimental, really taking the listener on a narrative journey over the course of a track, even if there isn't any obvious imagery evoked by these sonic landscapes. Film score is a genre pretty much defined by its use of particular progressions and emotional representations crafted to mirror or redefine the atmosphere of the on-screen visuals. Oftentimes, if the music sounds enough like the movie, it will play in your mind when you hear the song. But other artists will craft filmic soundscapes whole cloth, letting the listener imagine their own world implied in the sounds. For instance, Omar Rodrigues-Lopez has an album like Emmanuel Dexterity Volume 1, and Boris albums like Praparat, which were devised as soundtracks to films which don't exist, though they tell a story much more in vibe than in imagery in your mind. Narrative is such a massive part of music on so many levels, and yet isn't even completely necessary to make a good song. I would argue that it's nearly impossible not to tell any kind of story in a song, no matter how simplistic, but some songs can tell a simple story so perfectly that you just can't stop coming back to them. I'll never be able to stop playing Anarchy in the UK because no other song will ever represent the straightforward joy of declaring your desire to be anarchy the way that that song will. Likewise, Damn You People by G.I. and the Idiots is the ultimate Damn You People song, and the one I'll be ending the video on. If you like my writing, consider supporting me financially through whichever means you prefer among those listed in the description. I talk about currently airing shows as they air on the Content channel with Best Guy Ever, and I'll soon be starting a series of end-of-the-decade lists on this channel with the top 50 anime first. I'll probably do 3 lists this month and the rest next month, since I'm also trying to catch up on literally more than 100 rants, and hopefully I want to finish the second volume of my light novel before the month is over. Wish me luck, and thanks again for watching. I'll see you in the next one.
People think I'm lazy. They always think I'm crazy.